Across Africa, electoral management bodies face a growing challenge of deficits in electoral integrity. The recent edition of the Electoral Integrity Global Report 2019 to 2021 shows that Africa is home to countries with either low or very low electoral integrity. The report highlights political finance regulation as one of the weakest areas of African electoral cycles and calls upon policymakers, candidates, and electoral authorities to improve reporting mechanisms to allow for maximum transparency in the use of money in elections. A cornerstone of ensuring transparency and accountability in political finance is the requirement for political parties and candidates to disclose information about how they raise and append campaign finance. Yet, in many African electoral jurisdictions, the provisions of campaign finance disclosure and reporting are still lacking. Electoral management bodies and political party registrars are charged with the responsibility of promoting political finance transparency through their oversight function. That withstanding, majority operate within the context of absence or inadequate formal regulations and weak oversight and enforcement. It is against this background that Alliance for Finance Monitoring, ACFIM, has organized a webinar on promoting political finance transparency, the role of African electoral management bodies and political party registrars.
It's a very good afternoon from this side of the country. We are live in Kampala, Uganda. It's probably an evening somewhere else, and also probably an early morning. But wherever you are watching us from, welcome to yet another webinar series of Money in Politics. It's our 8th edition and happens every last Thursday of the month. And we discuss nothing but money in politics. And in today's edition, we are looking at promoting political finance transparency. What is the role of electoral management bodies and political party registrar? Once again, you're most welcome. You can catch us live. We are live on all our social media platforms. We are live on YouTube at ACFIM Uganda, Facebook, ACFIM, Twitter, ACFIM, and this show is proudly brought to you by Alliance for Finance Monitoring, Pan-African Political Finance Watchdog. Your day and moderator for the next 2 hours is Felix Kafuma, and I'm joined by a panel of four individuals. I'm going to introduce them in a short while. Across Africa, we have someone from Kenya, someone from Uganda, we have someone from Botswana, and also someone from Sierra Leone. So it's going to be a very interesting discussion as we delve deep into the practicalities of how can we promote political finance transparency, looking at their experiences. And this is, once again, proudly brought to you by Alliance for Finance Monitoring. And let's get started by first introducing my panel. And I'm going to start by introducing Florence Biria, who is the Deputy Registrar of Political Parties in the House of the Registrar of Political Parties, or RPP. That is Kenya. Florence has previously worked with the Independent Electoral Commission of Kenya, IEBC, and recently they did go through a very interesting election that to many by and large was a milestone to the democratic process of Kenya, but also many things to learn from as the other parts of the continent, other countries, many things to learn from Kenya, the way they did demonstrate electoral democracy from that end. But he has served at IEBC in a different capacity. She holds the bachelor's degree in commerce, majoring in finance, and has a master's in business administration. She's also a certified public accountant and a member of the Institute of Certified Public Accountants of Kenya, ICPAK in Kenya. It's very, very good to have you today joining us, Florence Biria, and you're most welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, the next panelist that I'm introducing is, and I'm still rehearsing this name, Pusetso Morapendi, who is a seasoned governance, peace, and security expert working with Botswana Center for Public Integrity. Botswana is also the host country for the Electoral Commissions Forum of the SADC countries. And it's one of those countries that has done some good work around legislating on money, political party financing, and also a bit of campaign financing. You are most welcome, Morapedi. It's good to have you on set. Okay, our next panelist is Henry Muguzi, who has come in on the last minute, but it's a blessing as well.
Thank you for having us.
Great. Henry Muguzi is standing in for someone who was supposed to be part of this show from the Electoral Commission of Uganda. But it's good that Henry is with us here. Henry is a seasoned expert on political finance and also is an activist, an anti-corruption activist. He's also an observer. He was in Kenya observing the elections, and we should be able to benefit from the wealth of expertise and experience when it comes to this area of political financing. Henry, you're most welcome.
Thank you, Felix, and thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Okay, and let me also introduce in absentia Augustine. I hope Augustine is on set. Augustine, Augustine is on set. He's the electoral manager of the Electoral Commission of Sierra Leone, where he has been working for the last 13 years and still counting. He holds the bachelor's degree with a honors in mass communication from Fura Bay College, University of Sierra Leone, and a master's in peace and development from Njala University, Sierra Leone. Mr. Augustine Koitekamia, I hope I pronounced this right, Koitekaima.
Yeah, it's Koitekaima.
How do you pronounce this name, Mr. Augustine?
Koitekaima.
Koitekaima. Oh, great. You are most welcome to this edition of the monthly webinar series. It's good to have you.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Always a pleasure. I think today I have to work on rehearsing two names of the people that are joining us on set today. But let's get this off the ground quickly. And I'm going to start with you, Henry, because I need you to kind of like lay foundation for this discussion. I know that you've done a lot of work around political financing. You're an expert in this area, and it would be good that you help us to make sense of this issue of promoting political finance transparency, especially looking at the role of electoral management bodies and political finance registrars, from the perspective that it's in their interest to organize credible elections, but also for them to have what we call credible elections that do not have integrity deficits. They should also interest themselves or ensure that campaign finance is not only regulated, but it's seen to be regulated. And this is where the issue around, or the issues of political finance transparency come into the picture. So what is your experience when it comes to enforcing transparency in financing electoral campaigns in particular, and also when it comes to political parties in general? As an observer, as an expert, what is the experience across Africa as the country, as the continent, sorry?
Thank you, Felix. Let me start like this by stating that the African continent suffers from the challenges of lack of electoral integrity. And one of the reasons why, the factors why that is so, is because we seem to not be succeeding in terms of regulating money. And let me also state that regulating money in electoral processes is necessary for credible and genuine elections, which is why across the world today, the effort is on how do we ensure that there is increased transparency in financing politics and election campaigns. If you look at what's happening where governments have not tended to step forward and be equal to the task, we have seen that electoral management bodies have stepped forward. You will know, Felix, from your experiences, that as we speak, the Association of World Electoral Bodies is focusing on promoting political finance transparency as one of its themes for the past 2 years, and still growing strong. But in Africa, we do not seem to see electoral management bodies stepping forward. And the reason we are talking electoral management bodies in Africa is because in many electoral jurisdictions, it's the electoral management bodies that also double as the political finance regulators, where you have some provisions to regulate political finance, political party financing, and election campaign financing. You get to see that this responsibility has been entrusted with electoral management bodies. But these electoral management bodies seem to have narrowly construed their mandate to mean only conducting and regulating, organizing and conducting elections. The truth must also be told that the role of regulating money in politics is so humongous that some of the electoral management bodies are overstretched. But the times we are living in Africa today, we are also facing extra challenges of gigantic dimensions. For example, in many of our countries, there is concealment in the manner in which money in elections is sourced. I'll tell you, you mentioned earlier that I was one of the observers in Kenya elections. I was there for an extended period. I saw too much money flowing in those elections, and it was mind-boggling where it was coming from. Nobody would tell you for sure that this is the source of it, and that's the danger, because then the suspicions are rife that most of the money that finds its way into financing African elections is actually dirty money. And dirty money thrives where there is darkness. And where there is darkness and concealment, a lot of things happen. Right now, you get to see that many African economies have opened up to cryptocurrencies. Now, these digital currencies, such as crypto and many others, thrive on darkness because they are not regulated by the central banks, and so the manner in which they are regulated remains questionable. But yet, they are a potential avenue for channeling campaign finance, and therefore you get to see that this is a serious issue. You also have a situation where you have African conventions, such as the African Union Convention for Preventing and Curbing Corruption and the African Charter on Democracy, which do not seem to pay sufficient attention to promoting transparency and openness in financing politics and election campaigns. And therefore, because it is in the very interests of the electoral management bodies to ensure that the midwife elections that have integrity, it should equally be the interest of these electoral management bodies to ensure that there is transparency in political financing. When there is transparency in political financing, the people that participate in the elections, the people that observe in elections, will be able to know the sources of this money, will be able to know who finances the political parties they support. It is very disheartening but also improper for a voter to support a political party or candidate for whom they don't know where they are getting the money they are using to campaign. You understand? And so I think the electoral management bodies have every interest to step forward and ensure that there is transparency in this. And transparency also includes reporting that when this money is spent, there is a mechanism that requires and mandates the political parties and candidates that participate in the elections to report on how much they have spent and what they spent this money on. It is also intended to do away with the unwanted practice of using money to induce the decisions of voters. And therefore, I think until Africa has embraced this, we will not see a good progress in the democratization process. And so, which is why it's important that the electoral management bodies pay special attention and take keen interest in this. That's how I can lay the ground, Felix.
Thank you so much, Henry. Indeed, you've laid the ground very well for me to cross to Kenya, where we've just concluded a very interesting process. And Kenya is an interesting country because, one, you've legislated on campaign financing. You've even gone ahead and created a separate body that handles political parties. You've separated the role of electoral management from the role of managing political parties. So there's very good progressive indicators for Kenya. But Florence, from your experience and picking from what Henry has just shared, what is your take? Drawing from exactly, especially from the just concluded elections. First of all, what stopped your office from enforcing the campaign finance law? Because I know there were issues around there. But also, as a follow-up question, what is your experience and what's your take on when we talk about political finance transparency? Your mandate as a regulator, what is your experience in Kenya?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Felix. And good afternoon to all our viewers online in Kenya and across the African continent. Once again, my name is Florence Biria. CPA is a title that I carry as a certified public accountant in Kenya. I serve at the Office of the Registrar of Political Parties as a deputy registrar. I deputize the registrar alongside one more deputy. We are actually two in the office. And first of all, allow me to convey greetings from the registrar. And secondly, allow me to say that today is a very special day in Kenya. We are having the new president, the 5th president of the Republic of Kenya, addressing the nation for the first time since he was elected and sworn in as the 5th president of Kenya, and therefore it's a very special day. I'd really planned to take this time because the presidential address starts at 2:30 Kenyan time. It is now 2:20 p.m., 10 minutes to go. I would have really wanted to follow the proceedings live. I'm a very patriotic Kenyan. Unfortunately, I have to miss that. I have a TV in my office. I'm resisting the temptation of looking the other way where the TV is. That is number one. Number two, as Kenyans, we really appreciate the support that we received from across the continent and also from across the globe during the just concluded general elections, which took place on 9th of August, 2022, and a bit of an extension of the same for the areas where elections did not take place on that day, whereby we had then another set of elections, about 8 or 9 electoral areas having elections on the 29th of August and of the same year. And everything now is concluded, including the presidential petition is concluded and the president is sworn in. And a lot has been happening, including the unveiling of the president's nominees for the cabinet members. Having said that, and appreciating the work that among the many observers and countries of goodwill that came to support us, Of course, you see the competition was very steep, especially the presidential election competition, the gubernatorial election competitions, and the other 4 elective positions, because in a general election in Kenya, we elect 6 elective positions: the president, the governors, the members of National Assembly, the women representatives, the senators, as well as the members of the county assembly. Because in Kenya, we have the devolved system, we have the county government and the national government. I don't want to go into the details of that, but well, we thank God for the successful election that we had in Kenya. I know that some of us are wondering, why am I calling it successful election? Yet we had a petition for the presidential election. We have other petitions that are ongoing, because the presidential election has to be, upon filing, has only 14 days to be concluded. But we also have the other petitions for the elective positions that have a span of about 6 months within which they should be concluded. But we say it was a successful election, and we thank God for it. That even at the end of that petition, everybody has settled down, and the contestants at that level, grudgingly, some of them, because everybody, when you compete to win. There is nobody who competes to fail. So when you fail, definitely it's a disappointment, because that's not the result anybody expects when they are competing. So we expect that a bit of pain, but healing quite fast. And we're happy that there have been no demonstrations in the roads, there have been no damaging of property, there's been no loss of life, and there's been no mobilization of supporters to act against the direction of the government in place. So to us, that is good. Because you know where Kenya has come from. Looking back in the elections of 2007 and up to 2008, the aftermath of that, we've come from a very dark history. So seeing what is happening currently, we can only thank God and build our country. Now, quickly going back to the issue of financing money in politics in Africa, and particularly in Kenya. Financing of campaigns, and also financing of political activities within political parties. I know this is a huge topic to discuss. And somebody was asking, why should there be money in campaigns? Why should there be money in political activities? And my answer would be, there is need for money in every activity. If you must run a successful program of whatever nature, you need money. Yeah, even in our own houses. If you are to keep your living room neat, you need money. Yeah, if you are to educate your children, you need money. And therefore, there is need for money in politics. The question is, how is this money controlled? How is this money managed? How is this money regulated? So that it doesn't become the end in itself, that everybody is pursuing money so that they can win election, that nobody is chasing money so that they can acquire power in terms of forming government in a country, which comes with many other responsibilities, but also with many other privileges and other powers. So talking of political parties in Kenya, we have the separated mandate between the EMB, the Electoral Management Body, that manages and conducts election and the related processes. We also have the Office of the Registrar of Political Parties that basically concentrates on political parties. And this office has a mandate of registering political parties in Kenya, regulating all registered political parties in Kenya, as well as administering the Political Parties Fund. So that's a concept that probably, as we continue the discussion, I'll be able to elaborate that in Kenya, we have an established fund in law to support political party activities within the parameters and the criteria given in law. So having said that, it's therefore important to appreciate the distinction in terms of the mandate of the EMB and the ORPP. You'll allow me to use that short form ORPP for Office of the Registrar of Political Parties that I represent in this particular panel. As an office, we have an Act of Parliament that allows us to discharge our mandate and functions which at the same time also prescribes the mandate and the functions of the office, and how then we go about registering parties and regulating parties, activities of political parties. Part of the activities includes how political parties manage their finances, because political parties have membership, and in their constitutions, we make them also provide for how they are going to receive financial resources. Political parties are allowed to collect membership fees from their members. They're allowed to receive donations. They're allowed to receive grants, and they're allowed to receive contributions, from within Kenya, financial contribution, donations, as well as grants from within Kenya. Any support coming from outside can only be in the form of technical support, but not direct hard cash. So having said that, therefore, even the management of the sources, or the resources rather, not the sources, but the resources of political parties, again, falls under the purview of the Office of the Registrar, being the regulator in Kenya, the sole regulator of political parties in Kenya. You realize that that mandate is very huge. You will realize it's huge once you separate it from the EMB, because you realize that now, as it stands alone, you start seeing the details that you need to focus on, even as you build institutions in political parties, because that is actually one of the things that we are so keen about, building institutions in political parties, that political parties are not entities owned by a few individuals or just crafted for purposes of an election, but the institutions that have a perpetual lifespan, so that a member will be in the party until they die. For example, I'll give you an example of our second president of the Republic of Kenya, who has since been the longest serving president, Moi, who served for 24 years. He passed on about a year or 2 years ago. He was a life member of KANU. He was the president in the Republic of Kenya for those 24 years as a nominee of a political party called KANU in Kenya. And until today, he died about 1 year plus ago. The political party KANU is still there. And even in the current parliament, both national and county assemblies, we have members elected on KANU ticket. That means the party has outlived. It has lived beyond some of the members, including the president, a former president who was a member of KANU. And that really is what we mean when we say we want to institutionalize political parties, so that a party does not die with the founding member, a party does not die with the senior most elected leader of that particular party when they die or when they leave the party. You will realize that, for example, the president, the current president, is a member of a party called United Democratic Alliance Party of Kenya. Previously, he was a member of Jubilee. So he left Jubilee, he joined UDA, he was elected president, but Jubilee did not die. Jubilee is still there, because Jubilee has been institutionalized, and we have officials elected to run the party. So whether the senior most elected leader is in the party or leaves the party or even dies, does not mean that the party also dies. It exists and goes beyond. Now, quickly coming back, that means that person who is the senior most is not the source of the finances, which therefore facilitate the programs of the party, because the party has its own sources. So if the senior most officer or leader leaves, the party can still continue because they have their own other sources to carry on with their prioritized programs in support of the party ideology. Now, campaign financing. In Kenya, because of the arrangement I've explained, there's a distinction between regulation of political parties and management of election. So campaign and therefore campaign financing is a function and therefore a responsibility that falls under the EMB. That is the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission, that is IBC. They're the ones, that is the body that actually enforces the Campaign Financing Act. We know that it's been a challenge for the last several years to have that law enacted, and the attempt to have regulations, as a fast-forward mechanism of implementing some of the critical components that were necessary for the elections, then did not see the light of the day. And towards the tail end of the process, the electioneering period to the election day, did not really see the light of day. But the EMB has its own mechanisms of checking because they require candidates to have bank accounts separate for their campaign activities, which they actually monitor as part of their code. They have the election code. So that code also, in a way, has helped the AMB to kind of monitor and enforce whatever provisions are there in as far as management and control of campaign financing is concerned. Unfortunately, that particular law, that is the Campaign Financing Act, is not within the mandate of ORPP to implement. That is the sole responsibility of the EMB to implement. But coming back to the political parties, because political parties will be there even before the official campaign period. You realize the official campaign period is very short. It's about 2 months to the election date. But way before that, like you saw in Kenya, the campaign activities began as early as last year, before the official campaign period was declared in Kenya. So that means there was use of funds in campaign activities, which the EMB could not manage, could not enforce their provisions because it was outside the official campaign period. That's where ORPP comes in, because those are considered to be the political party activities. And where we are talking of political party activities, then the regulator comes in handy to monitor and ensure that there is compliance with the existing law and including the code. So we have several requirements of a political party that 3 months or 6 months before an election, they must submit a declaration statement of their assets and their liabilities, finance levels, so that we know what was the finance level of a political party 6 months to an election, and therefore what happens to the point at which after the election, again, 90 days after the election, they make another declaration, and therefore now you can be able to reconcile what happened in between, which basically that will be the activities and the financing of those activities that contributed to their election campaigns. So yes, we are almost there as a country, but we're not really there in the absence of that Campaign Financing Act. I know it's been there almost at the tail end, but it has never quite hit the ground. Having said that, I think I want to just contribute or just to interject on 1 or 2 issues that my predecessor, the one who spoke before me, I'm trying to recall his name.
Henry.
Muguzi, Mr. Muguzi, sorry, Mr. Muguzi, I was trying to remember your name. That's not a common name in Kenya. That Africa as a continent suffers electoral integrity challenges, and therefore causing failure to the control of campaign money. And my take is that electoral integrity is a function of many factors, not just money. It's a function of including technology. It's a function including the process that produces even the candidates that come to the fore and therefore becoming the options for the voters to select and make a choice from. I wouldn't want to really ask Africans to beat ourselves that hard. We know we have challenges and weaknesses, but if we say this is a problem of Africa as a continent, we will be adopting a narrative that has been deliberately skewed Yeah, and that would not be very good for ourselves, because we know other continents that we believe are quite developed that have suffered electoral integrity issues, and they have had evidences to that. And therefore, let's say that this is a general election. Electoral integrity is a general issue that needs to be addressed globally, but I don't think it's something that as Africa we want to beat ourselves so hard about. I think it's a global problem in elections, and therefore we need to join hands globally and have this worldwide and have this issue addressed. Because every time we are talking about Africa, we are looking at the ills, but it's time also to look at what we are doing better than the other continents. The other thing that I wanted to touch about is about the money that was circulating a lot, that was noted by the observers in Kenya during the just concluded general election. It's a myth that probably I need to see the report, because we know from the students of economics, we may not be students of economics, but the moment a country prints more money, than the worth of its goods and services, of what it is producing, then there's a problem in that economy, because we know that when there is too much supply of money, then that can even crash the economy, because there will be too much purchasing power by even people who should not ideally be able to afford certain things, and they will be able to afford. I can tell you that the living standards in Kenya did not change that much during the elections, have not changed that much during the elections. Prices had been pushed a little bit up because of issues of supply of goods, including specifically food products, and the maize flour in particular, because ugali, which is made from maize flour, is our staple food. And a packet of flour was pushed up from about 150 shillings, Kenya shillings, to about 200 Kenya shillings. And families would actually spend more than one day without a single meal, because that price was too high for them. So if there was too much money in campaigns, how come the common families could not even afford a meal in a day during that time? Because we should have expected them to live luxuriously, and then probably life changes after that. So we've not seen this money, because otherwise central bank will be very busy trying to mop out the excess monies in the economy. We've not seen that. Interest rates are still very low, meaning central bank is not mopping out any excess monies. So where does this money go to that was too much? And they're flooding the campaign environment just a month ago. I've not seen it, and I've not seen anything that can support that narrative. Thank you so much.
Interesting. There's something called local demand. But we shall come back to that debate after, because you can still have a lot of money circulating in an election and the economy is not so much disrupted if there is local demand, and also if the money is being spent, not necessarily overly on consumptive aspects. But that's the debate for another day. I want to bring in here Professor to share your experiences from your country. Exactly when we talk about issues around money in politics, political finance transparency. I know Botswana has a law with some provisions on regulating political financing and also campaign financing. But what's the experience, the law and the practice in that part of the country?
All right, thank you for inviting us. But before I answer your question, let me just maybe speak to what Florence said about money, too much money in the economy or in the country. You can actually have too much money, and I'll give you an example with elections in Botswana in 2019. We could see too much money with how many 3-liter Hiluxes were used for campaigns. We could see too much money with the helicopters that were actually being used for campaigns by political parties. We could see too much money with the buses that were branded with party colors and the T-shirts that were being given out. So the too much money doesn't mean the economy has got money or people have money, but you can see that there is a movement of money in the cities, in the villages, and you don't know where that movement is coming from. And I think that is why conversations on limitations and campaigns and how much donations parties can get, especially from external of members or external of membership. That's why it is important, because when it comes to too much money circulating during campaigns and during the election phase itself, for the party, it means attainment of power for those that win. But for the citizens, it could also mean one of many things. It could mean the trade-offs that we never know. Because if we don't know where that money is coming from, and we're not at the table that negotiated the donations to a political party or to a candidate, we don't know what the trade-offs are. So for the party, they're getting the money and they're getting the donations in terms of technical support, in terms of those who advise with campaigns, but also those who loan their cars or their buses. We don't know what the deals are. So the parties gain, but in the long run, the citizens may be actually losing one land, because we don't know what the trade-offs are. Mining rights, because we don't know what the trade-offs are. Contracts that are supposed to be done in an open manner, because we don't know what the deals were and how they were made before the party won. In Botswana, to answer to speak to your question, Felix, your statement, yes, the Electoral Act does provide for limitations. It used to be 50,000 pula. 50,000 pula, I think, is about what, maybe $4,500, right? So you can also see, maybe it's because we are a small country we're a big country with a small population. So even the thinking around how much one can spend or how much one can receive in terms of campaign donation, we thought it can never be more than 50,000 pula or $4,500. But because there was so much money, too much money that we saw in terms of what was happening with campaigns, 2019, I think it was December or November, Parliament sat down and they passed an amendment to the Electoral Act where they increased that limit to 2 million pula. So moving from 4.5 USD, right, to close to 200,000 USD, because they realized something. They realized that they actually did something that was a little bit maybe out of the way. But that is what's interesting about political parties when it comes to financing. In this one, as a civil society activist, I will take it back to the citizens. The question is, do citizens care what happens in their political parties? Do citizens pay membership fees? I mean, Moy, for example, can we actually get a receipt of how much he was paying every month or annually as a member of the party, as a live member of the party? I always say, if we don't care about how much and what happens to our parties, if we don't ask for financial reports, if we don't ask for audit reports of our own political parties, then we deserve what we're getting with our national executive committees, how they get money and how they use the money. Because at the center of promoting transparency and accountability is the members of the party themselves. But if the members of the parties don't know or do not care, then we are going to be talking about the lack of electoral integrity and the lack of accountability and the lack of transparency in political party financing. Henry spoke earlier about how the AU convention or even the AU charter don't really speak explicitly on the issue. And one can argue and say, but the UNCAC, which is the UN Convention, would speak explicitly on the issue, and its different working groups. Because I remember in 2014, there was a working group that was supposed to deal with financing of candidatures and financing of political parties to promote accountability and transparency. And one of the questions that they were asking, that the working group was asking for member states to ask and implement, were restrictions and limits on private contributions. If it's not a member of the party and it's a company, what will be the restriction, the limits? And the MBs, through the Electoral Act, try to meet this provision with the limits, like say $200,000 when it comes to campaigning or donations, right? And the balance between private and public funding, what will be that balance? But if the members of political parties and citizens do not care that there should be a balance, then who's actually going to enforce it? It's not going to be the political parties. It's not going to be the political parties that will eventually be running government because it works for them. Less accountability is less work for them. Allocation of public financial support. When you receive money, normally in civil society, we write a proposal, and there's always a budget line. We know where the money is going. So it's going for conference and this and transport. But with parties, where does the money go? We don't have that because the members of the political parties do not care or do not know that they should care and ask for these things. Spending limits for campaigns. Too much money was seen. It's seen through the branding and the helicopters and the food that's being given to people, the donations, the soup kitchens that now start being mounted. Where is that money coming from? It's coming from somewhere. Most of the time it's not coming from the politicians because most of them aren't that rich. So there is a private person somewhere who's given that money. But what is the deal? And that is why it's important to look into this. That's why it is important for members of the political parties to say, what are you selling on our behalf? When you receive this money for you to win, what are you saying this person will get or this company will get? So the limits there are necessary. So, and that's where now the EMBs really come in, the independent regulatory mechanisms and sanctions that are needed in case of legal violations. And I love the fact that Kenya actually has a registrar of political parties. It's actually needed because the registrar of societies in Botswana cannot, and I understand why, it would not have, if I may use this word, let me not use that word. It does not have the courage. I'll say that. It doesn't have the courage to go after the political parties, because one of those political parties is actually comprising of a member who is their boss, right? So the president is a member of the party and the minister is a member of the party. Now you're saying a party where your minister or your boss is party of or party to, you must go and ask them to actually give them your books for the year and audit reports. So that does not happen. That does not take place. But I like the fact that, Florence is working for RPP and they're trying to regulate what happens with political parties. And I always say during civic education, sometimes to joke, but I'm being serious, that political parties misbehave and they're allowed to misbehave. And then from there, we expect them to behave differently when they run government. When a political party does not account internally, how do we expect them to cultivate a culture of transparency and accountability when they're running government with so much power? So much power. And in our case, the Constitution giving so much power to a sitting president and cabinet, and we expect them to actually be accountable. I don't know how that is possible. So I really do love the RPP in Kenya, and I hope other countries can also look into that and do the same, and really put people that are neutral and impartial, because we tend to put people who are coming from the ruling party, and I hope that is not the case, Ms. Florence, to really ensure that balanced way of looking at what political parties are doing and of enforcing the act and enforcing, making sure that people actually join political parties. And I love how you say building institutions in political parties, because sometimes we forget that these are more like companies that we hire. So how healthy they are, and you are right, they need money to be healthy. So, but where that money is coming from will determine exactly how our democracy, strengthens and how healthy or fit it will be. But if the money is just coming in and going somewhere, will not institutionalize political parties. And this is happening in most countries, including Botswana, the shining democracy in Africa. So I love that we're having these discussions, and I think it's one topic that civic educators must take up. And as the Botswana Center for Public Integrity, we definitely will take it up. We will be working with the IEC Botswana very soon on civic education. It's one that we'll take up on the importance of citizens actually joining political parties and caring about the parties and what happens in the parties when it comes to funding coming from themselves and funding coming externally. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You raised very important points around issues to do with third-party reporting, sources of donations, who asks the hard questions. Do citizens actually belong to political parties, or political parties are small clubs representing their own interests? Yes, I hope I have Augustine on call, because Augustine, are you there? Because Augustine, as an electoral manager at the Electoral Commission of Sierra Leone, I would want to hear your experiences when it comes to, first of all, enforcing aspects of political finance transparency, how it works out in Sierra Leone. Because I know, Morapedi, you've partly touched the issue of the appointing authority and the autonomy of these entities on how they do exercise their mandate. Sometimes they allow political parties to misbehave, and that they set a precedent because the main party or the party in power is already misbehaving, and no one can point a finger at that party. So very interesting discussions out there. I don't know whether Augustine is on call, but if Augustine is not on call, I'm going to come back to Henry, because Henry has just joined us again. Henry, as I wait for Augustine, the issue around EMBs in Africa today, mainly limiting their understanding or mandate to organizing and conducting elections and paying less attention to the political finance regulation role. Kenya is a good example, but there are very few Kenya-like in Africa. What explains this? Why do we have such a situation? Uganda is culpable to that as well. Why do we have a situation where the function, the roles of PFR are sidelined, and the roles of EMBs are more pronounced in Africa?
Thank you very much, Felix. Of course, happy to be here again. I liked it when Percepcio talked about these political parties. You see, political parties, many Africans don't take them seriously. But you see, those political parties are indeed governments in waiting. So as a government in waiting, it must demonstrate by word and deed that when they get into power, and power, that word power has to be well understood, that when they get into power, they will be able to comply with the principles of accountability, transparency, and that they are democratic themselves, which is not what we are seeing. What we are seeing in political parties is things that you sometimes sit back and question whether they are even political parties, and whether they're just vessels being used by individuals to deliver them to certain political destinations. Now, a political party, when you look around, you see many of them suffer from what people have called big man syndrome. One man founded it, owns it, funds it. It is not clear where they're getting their money. They are conceding everything. You cannot see one of them stepping forward to be counted as an island of integrity. And then you question, do things integrity even matter in the lives of these leaders? And so political parties, I think, is something you can look at. Now, coming back to your question, these electoral management bodies, now I'm sharing the experience of Uganda. Either the fellows that have crafted the laws have limited understanding of the role of organizing and conducting elections, or the electoral management body itself that we have in Uganda does not understand the roles, the additional roles of being a political party regulator and a political finance regulator, a political party registrar and a political finance regulator, because the EMB in Uganda is shouldering these three roles. These roles are so humongous. No wonder, for the longest time, what you get to see is that they have a desk that works on political parties and a desk that works on political party financing. You cannot regulate political parties on the basis of a desk. That's a full-time job. So it lacks the men and women, the boots on the ground that will chase these political parties to make sure that they comply with the statutory requirements of submitting annual returns, of submitting audit reports, and that when these reports are submitted, there is an effort to notify the public to come and inspect these. This doesn't happen. As a matter of fact, what's happening here is that those political finance provisions in the Political Party and Organizations Act are not enforced, and because they're not enforced, the political parties simply do not follow them. We have made attempts to request for information, to access information on this, and we have failed as an organization. On the other hand, acting and operating as a political finance regulator is also such a huge task that the Electoral Commission can't deliver on. For example, the Electoral Commission, we have a law in place that enables political parties that have representation in Parliament to benefit from public financing. The money is appropriated in the Ministry of Finance, is disbursed to the Electoral Commission, which in turn sends it to the political parties. The law says this money should be audited and should be managed in accordance with the requirements of public financial management. This does not happen. When the political parties receive this money, they basically go into festive mode. They feast on this money. Nobody knows what they use it for. There are no guidelines as to what expenses are eligible and which expenses are ineligible. And they don't account for it. The Auditor General, who is mandated by law to audit this money, has not audited it. He says, this money is enveloped in politics, and therefore it is dangerous money. I don't want to get anywhere near politics. So the political parties have a shroud of darkness, a cloud of darkness, which has facilitated the thieving and the thuggery of this money. They feast on it. When it comes, they share it among the political party leaders. And when you look at the annual budgets of these political parties, you see very small numbers. The numbers that do not, correspond with the volumes they have received in a particular financial, and therefore you question, where is this money going? But because the biggest, culprit is the party in power, the NRM, headed by the president, the Alpha and Omega, the general, they fear to even raise a finger, because if you go for little Democratic Party, they will say, but why don't you first go with the other one who takes the lion's share? And they don't want to touch it. So there are real issues. So the conclusion is that the electoral management body in Uganda cannot and should not be the body that is interested with the regulating political finance. It should also be that the role of registering and managing political parties gets to be taken away. We have lessons to draw from Kenya. Why don't we have an institution, a separate institution, that regulates and registers political parties, that is able to follow through on some of these political parties, on whether or not they live to the requirements of the ethical principles of a government that is in waiting, or whether and whose interests are they serving? When they go to access this money, who do they access it from? We do know that because Africa is a victim of illicit financial flows, these illicit financial flows have continued to thrive because some of this money from those illicit financial flows comes back to finance politics, and it does so through the political parties. You see a political party, behaving as if money is not a problem. A political party flying around in choppers, and as if choppers are like borders around. And then you wonder, where is the money coming from? Who are they accounting for? And the people who are providing this money, what do they expect in return? So when we entrust you with government, what are you going to do? Whose interest are you going to serve? Are you going to serve the interests of your financier, your benefactor, or the interests of us, the electors? And so these are questions I think Africa has to come to terms with. Unfortunately, if you look at our leaders, many of them are just, it's as if they fear this thing. Nobody can step forward and say this has to be done. Countries where they have these provisions, they're not being implemented. The situation we had in Kenya, we have these provisions in many other countries. The issue is enforcement. They cannot enforce them. And then you ask yourself, you who are interested with power, why does it happen that when it comes to enforcing these, you become so powerless? Who has captured you? And so there are many questions you keep asking, you cannot find answers. And so I think we need to come to terms with this, but the electoral management bodies have to step forward. It is in their interest to make sure that they midwife elections that have integrity, and there is no way you're going to midwife an election that has integrity if you're not embracing and promoting the issues of transparency and openness in financing politics. Back to you, Felix.
Thank you so much. Listening to you, you really remind me that I have an activist on set here. But very interesting discussions. You're still watching the monthly webinar series, the 8th edition.
Across Africa, electoral management bodies face a growing challenge of deficits in electoral integrity. The recent edition of the Electoral Integrity Global Report 2019 to 2021 shows that Africa is home to countries with either low or very low electoral integrity. The report highlights political finance regulation as one of the weakest areas of African electoral cycles and calls upon policymakers, candidates, and electoral authorities to improve reporting mechanisms to allow for maximum transparency in the use of money in elections. A cornerstone of ensuring transparency and accountability in political finance is the requirement for political parties and candidates to disclose information about how they raise and append campaign finance. Yet, in many African electoral jurisdictions, the provisions of campaign finance disclosure and reporting are still lacking. Electoral management bodies and political party registrars are charged with the responsibility of promoting political finance transparency through their oversight function. Notwithstanding, majority operate within the context of absence or inadequate formal regulations and weak oversight and enforcement. It is against this background that Alliance for Finance Monitoring, ACFIM, has organized a webinar on promoting political finance transparency, the role of African electoral management bodies and political party registrars.